各位朋友，大家好啊！歡迎收睇人氣馬場。咁啊，近幾年啦，都有唔少嘅新面孔咧加入香港賽馬會喎。而我哋今集嘅嘉賓咧，相信大家咧好多時候咧都會聽到佢把聲啊，就係我身邊嘅 Mark。Hello Mark, welcome to my show. So can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Ian. I'm Mark McNamara, the English race caller presenter as part of the trackside team here in Hong Kong. Been here for just on 6 months, so nice to be joining you.
Yeah, so are you enjoying your time, even you are just like here for only 6 months?
Yeah, loved my time so far. It's been fantastic. Still strange not to see the crowds because all the vision you see before coming to Hong Kong was a full Sha Tin, a full Happy Valley, but it's good to see some people starting to get back to the races, so hopefully sometime in the not too distant future we'll get to see packed houses at both venues.
So lots of people when they're coming to Hong Kong to work, they say that, oh, it's a dream come true because Hong Kong is one of the best racing jurisdictions. So are you feeling the same?
Absolutely. It's got great horses, Golden 60, Beauty Generation, some of the best jockeys in the world, your Zach Purtons, your Joe Moreira's, Karis Teaton's riding really well. They've got the future coming through. Jerry Chow's ridden a treble now too. So the future's great for racing in Hong Kong. It's been great and it will continue to be.
So Mark, can you tell us about how do you get involved in horse racing?
My dad used to love going to the races when I was a kid, and I'd tag along with him as about a 5 to a 14, 15-year-old. And we'd go most Saturdays to races in Sydney when he wasn't working, and I wanted to be a jockey actually growing up.
Really?
Then I rode a horse for the first time and that was the end of that. I think I was 12. And I just started taking note of the race callers, which I'd done ever since I was little, and thought I'd like to have a go at that. And luckily enough, one thing led to another. And Melbourne Cup Day at about a 14 or 15-year-old, I happened to miss school again. I was never at school Melbourne Cup Day, and I got a lucky break and it all went from there.
Really? So actually, that means that from a young age that you don't like to go to school. You love to go to the race courses with your father.
I'd love to go to the races any day more than going to school. So, apart from early on where you'd be able to use the length of the straights in maths, when went to algebra, that was me done. I'd rather go to a Randwick or a Rosehill any day of the week.
Because originally you are the cadet for the 2KY. Is it kind of radio or something?
Yeah, that's the racing station in Sydney, Radio 2KY. And I was lucky to get that cadetship straight out of school, and I learnt lots back then, both on air and off air, and it was the great grounding. Radio's the best grounding you can get as a commentator. You learn to paint the picture and know that people can't see it, so you need to describe the best you can what's going on.
So basically, when we finish our school, there's a lot of choices. So why would you like to stick with horse racing? Honestly, Australia, there's a lot of sports, and you also like rugby. So why you pick horse racing?
Massive rugby league fan. Too small to play it, and I don't think my mother let me in the end. So I used to play soccer, football. Growing up, was pretty hopeless at it. Racing's just great. There's so many different jobs and you could have gone into. Those that don't know, racing see it as gambling. It's so important gambling over here. But for someone out of school, there's jockeys, there's stable hands, there's everything. I just wanted to be a race caller.
So I think it's all because of the atmosphere in Australia, just like all the people love horse racing, and especially the Melbourne Cup and all the big meetings, then just like create a very good childhood memory for you to be part of it.
It does, and luckily I had that connection with my father liking racing, and my grandmother before them, she liked racing as well. So they weren't big punters. They go on Saturday, they'd have their $5, $10 bet. They just love going to the races.
So can you tell me how do you learn most in 2KY?
2KY, I got my break there. I did some newsroom stuff. I worked in the control room behind the scenes, did a lot of studio work like the guys do for the simulcast racing over here. And then eventually the opportunity came to go out to the track. I'd still call trials, and I'd call 1 or 2 races at a meeting until they thought I was ready to call a full meeting.
Honestly, there's a lot of positions, even in racing or broadcasting. So you can be a TV presenter, you can in charge of other departments. Why would you like to be a race caller? I think it's one of the challenging jobs in racing.
I can't actually answer it. I don't know. It's just something I wanted to do from a kid, and fortunately, the memory was good enough to learn the colours, which is what it's all about. And you don't have to talk as fast as what people think you do. And it was just something that I can't even tell you what it was that attracted me to it, but I wanted to do it from a young age. And luckily enough, I did do it from a fairly young age, and it's still going.
So then you, after 2KY, then you work for Sky Racing. Is it, I mean, the job nature, is it similar?
Yeah, they were pretty similar. Sky bought 2KY, so they merged, and think I became the #2 New South Wales harness racing caller back then through that merger. So that really gave a good push to the future of where things would become. Had they not have bought Sky, who knows what might have happened, but that was a real big push forward in my career.
So as you mentioned, you are in charge of the second race caller for harness racing. So some of the racing fans even don't know what is harness racing. And I know what are the differences to fat racing, right? But I think the calling styles are totally different when you are calling a fat racing.
Yeah, absolutely. The harness racing is the one with the little sulkies on the back, called the buggies, the carts. They drivers sit behind. You've got a lot longer in those races. They generally go 2, 3, sometimes even 4 minutes, where a 1,000-metre race at Sha Tin might go 55 seconds or 54 if the wind's blowing the right way. So you've got so much more time, which you can learn about creating time in those shorter races for the gallops as well.
But the terms is different, as we know that jockey and the driver is in racing and also in harness racing.
That's right. Yeah, you can't call a driver a jockey because they get upset, and vice versa. You'll see a story on harness racing on the news in Australia, it's pretty rare that it gets much mainstream coverage, but it does occasionally. And the reporters who aren't from a racing background always call the drivers jockeys.
So you became a racing icon for harness racing in Australia. So then you take up a position in New Zealand. So can you tell me why would you like to make a move like this? Because actually you have built a very good reputation in your own career.
Yeah, it was a funny one. It was rather sad circumstances the New Zealand job came about. The guy that was doing the job before it became available, Darren Tycon, was killed in a car crash. And he was calling the main South Island meetings, and being a rather big harness racing fan back then, Addington and the New Zealand Cup is one of the biggest harness racing meetings anywhere in the world. So after a while, when Darren had passed, the idea that maybe I'd like to give it a go in New Zealand sort of started to grow. There's a track over there called Kaikoura, which is next to South Bay. Again, it's a harness track. I was a very big harness racing man back then. And it's beside the bluest of blue waters, and it always wanted to call a Kaikoura Cup. And luckily enough, I went through the interview process, I got the job, and spent 10 years in New Zealand calling both thoroughbreds. They had jumps racing back then, and New South Wales didn't run any jumps racing, and my first race in New Zealand was a hurdle race. And I learnt more in that 3.5 minutes I think I'd learnt in the previous 10 years.
So because, is it in Australia, do you call thoroughbred racing as well?
Did a little bit, not a whole lot. It was mainly country races. Harness racing was more my thing back then, just with the way the rostering was. There was some gallops in, which I enjoyed doing, but when I went to New Zealand, there was a lot more gallops throughout the South Island. And as I said, the jumps racing was something I'd never ever thought I'd get a chance to call, because apart from Victoria, South Australia, nowhere else in New South Wales, in Australia, ran jumps.
So now we have thoroughbred racing, we have jump racing, and we also have harness racing. Which one do you like the most?
Love the challenge of the thoroughbreds. I used to love the harness racing, but I'd done a lot of that in the previous 15 years. The thoroughbreds are so fast. They're so widely regarded worldwide. They sort of overtook harness racing the more I did them.
So is it difficult for you to, when you just like, because you normally do the harness racing, so when you have to do the thoroughbred racing, is it a little bit hard for you to, at the beginning?
It was at the beginning. It was just controlling the speed, because you'd be a little bit slower for the thoroughbreds coming from the harness racing, but the more you did, the easier it was to temper your speed, no matter whether you were doing the harness racing or the thoroughbreds.
So now you're in Hong Kong, so can you tell us your role?
My role is to either call or present one of the meetings, generally call the Sha Tin meetings of a Sunday and present Happy Valley on a Wednesday night, just depending on what the roster does. It's once or twice co-hosting on Racing to Win, which is the preview show, and then calling the trials as well, which has been really good to get to know the horses when I first got here.
So based on your calling experiences, what are the most memorable?
Most memorable? Golden 60s Derby. Never been so nervous in my life. Called plenty of big races in Australasia, but not one that was going to 9 or 11 countries. And it was, I can still remember it like it was yesterday, his Derby. Tiakau Shark, he was a winner at Riccarton when I was calling over there. A couple of races in New Zealand, because being based in Christchurch, it was flattened by an earthquake. There was a couple of earthquakes during races too, and they weren't much fun.
For the normal punters or racing fans, that if they are not in our position, they don't really know how much effort that we have to pay to before a race meeting. So we have to memorize the horse name that we cannot mix up because it will be just like no good for the owners. And also we have to remember the racing colors and some of the maybe some side information of the horse as well.
Absolutely. Whether it's a winning dreamer or an excellent proposal, which are two very good horses coming through, you know, their racing style generally, Skyfield, he gets back and runs on, but it's colour matching more than anything. Again, Skyfield wears yellow and green colours, but so does Sky Show, Sky Darcy, Sky Gem. So you have to remember to make sure not to call Skyfield Sky Show, Sky Darcy, Sky Show, etc. And that's the hardest part. If your concentration's not 100%, it's remembering to get the names right because it is the most awful feeling when you get it wrong.
That's true because when a race caller call a horse named wrong, that you can easily to see the criticism on Twitter. So have you ever find any criticize?
Yeah, there's been I copped a little bit when I got a photo wrong when Band of Brothers grabbed Gloria Spectrum. I thought Gloria Spectrum had won it by a nose. It's no matter what criticism you get is nothing that the criticism you'll give yourself. It is the most lonely feeling when you get it wrong. Every race caller would have done it. There's nothing you can do other than try and turn the page and move on, but you'll have a sleepless night, you'll try and work out why it happened and how it happened. It's just an awful, awful feeling.
So I have interest to know that because every race we have a favorite, right? So as a race caller, is it you mainly focus on the favorite, where they position, or how can you just like plan out how to call a race?
Best plan is to not plan. If it's a really short priced favourite, like your Golden 60 or Beauty Generation, they will get a little more focus than, say, a 3 or 4 favourite. But yeah, to not plan it and just go out and call it as you see it. Because if you try and anticipate or you try and call what you think is going to happen, that's when you're going to get yourself in big problems.
So after spending 10 years in New Zealand, then you moved back to Australia before coming to Hong Kong. So can you tell me why would you like to make this move?
It was something that I hadn't contemplated. Yeah, I went back to Australia for family reasons after New Zealand, 10 years there, and I was driving to Bathurst Trots one day and my boss here, Doug Chalmers, champion fella, love you Dougie, he sent me a message. I'd spoken to him when Tom came up and I wasn't really in a position to come to Hong Kong then. And I was driving to Bathurst Trots and he sent me a message, can we have a chat? And I knew Brett was leaving, so I knew I wasn't ringing just to say hello. And gave it a lot of hours of thought, a few sleepless nights, and in the end went through the process and luckily enough landed the job.
Yeah, so we are happy to have you here in Hong Kong as well. So what would you like to achieve in horse racing?
Been lucky that everything I've wanted to achieve, luckily enough to been able to do it. I don't really set goals anymore. I just see where it takes me. I never thought I'd come to Hong Kong, and here I am, and having never been here, it's a great city, and when it gets and the world gets back to normal, it's going to be even better. So, look, I couldn't tell you any goals because I don't know where the world's going to take me next.
So that means that my next questions, how do you see yourself in 5 years?
Hopefully still here in Hong Kong. Yeah, I'd like to be here for quite a few years. Love the city, here with my girlfriend. She likes it too, and it's a great place to live.
So last but not least, if a youngster would like to be a race caller, what's your advices for them?
It's a great career. You do need to have some lucky breaks getting into it. It's a lot of unpaid work to start off with. You have to really dedicate your time, and you just practice, 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 and practice. Call what you see, and call as if the people listening can't see the race. I know television's the be-all and end-all now, but coming from a radio background, there is still radio in most countries that people will listen to the races on. Close your eyes, review your tapes, listen back, still listen back to every race after I've called it in case there's something that you haven't noticed or there's something you think you can improve on. You'll never stop learning.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for coming and wish you all the best.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, 18.